Yeah, that's...
Confidence to be a good communicator will come from learning the skills of how to do it.
Yeah, that is a tremendously important point. So there's a job for someone, isn't there? Very good to talk to you, David. Thank you very much for joining us on that.
No.
That was an invaluable...
Yeah, because he's right, isn't it? It sort of makes it more like a test that you haven't actually been adequately prepared for. Yeah. And yet you're still supposed to do it. So, yeah, it's a really good point.
Extensive media coverage for hours leading up to the new Apple announcement today. Live crosses to the Steve Jobs Centre, with reporters earning their money with nothing much to say. Some serious speculation in the television studios of America.
I feel like an Apple Watch is just like a daily shaming device. But it's not that the phone is, it's not that it's intentionally shaming me. It's just that I feel ashamed when it's like, oh, you've only walked not 10,000 steps today.
That's what I felt about screen time. I felt like it was shaming me.
You see, the conversation was there because they didn't know what the phones were going to look like, but good on them. Would our parents have been agape with amazement at the level of devotion we offer up to gadgets now, panellists?
Yes. I would think so. I was swimming yesterday and I had on a Garmin heart rate monitor, which sort of straps around your chest, which talks to my watch, which then talks to my phone. And somebody came up to me at the gym and said, "What is that thing for?" And when I tried to explain, he sort of had this really blank look on his face as if to say, "What are you doing? And what is it even there for?"
What is the point?
What is the point? And I struggled, so I took it off.
Did you? So 3 new Apple handsets, including the $999 iPhone XS, the most advanced one yet, the $1,099, these are US dollars, waterproof XS Match, the Series 4 watch with a medically approved heart sensor, fastest processing yet, etc. A12 bionic chip. Things I don't fully understand. Yeah,
awesome.
Oh, yeah. What do you both need from a phone?
Mine tells me the time. And it doesn't even have a second hand, so it doesn't tell me the time particularly accurately.
No, that's true.
It's really cool.
So we need a phone with a second hand now.
No, I love this phone. I don't want a second hand.
I think I left mine behind once recently, and to be honest, I actually felt very naked not having my phone with me. I couldn't check my emails. I couldn't check how much money was in the bank. I couldn't Google Maps where I was going.
Yeah, that's a big one.
And I think for me that whole day, I remember getting on the plane and thinking it was almost like that, was it Air New Zealand Ansett ad back in the days where they throw the keys out the window? And I sort of thought, God, I don't have my phone. What am I going to do? And I got to Wellington and I went, well, I'll just go and take some money and put some coins into a payphone. I thought, well, there is no payphone. So how do you do this anymore? Yeah. So for me, I need my phone every day. I'm sure somebody will tell me I don't, but I need the things like the emails, the phone, obviously.
Do you still need your vital signs monitored, or is that over now?
I do, Jim. I'm training, so yes, I do.
Okay.
I do not need my
and it's
vital
September,
signs
so we should be using it to count our steps as well.
Should we? I did have a Fitbit for 3 months, and then I figured out on average how much I was doing, and then I thought, well, that's enough. Now I kind of know what the ballpark is.
Ah, clever.
Yeah, and I don't have to wear the stupid thing anymore.
If you live within the territory of the magpie, it doesn't attack you. I lived in Australia beside a large gum tree with resident magpies. They did wake me up at 4 o'clock, but they never swooped on me.
So he totally needs to bond with the magpies.
He needs to bond with the magpie.
Spend more time in Middle Road. Excellent.
Scott Campbell, thank you very much for your company today, and Catherine Robertson on the panel, and we're back tomorrow.
Tonight on Checkpoint, Fonterra's first annual loss in 17 years. In Bovis, tonight Checkpoint can reveal some farmers have culled stock and applied for compensation without an order from MPI to do so. Aurora Energy says it can't guarantee the safety of its network after documents reveal more than 6,000 power poles were last year deemed in urgent need of repair. All Blacks coach Steve Hansen reiterates his request for government money to keep the best rugby talent on shore. An Auckland councillor recommends homeowners affected by the council's resource consent botch up join a class action lawsuit. And the man who texted in last night to say Florence isn't used until it hits knew something. It's now a Category 2.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Bat in aho. The Fonterra Shareholders Council is confident the dairy company can turn things around. Fonterra has announced an annual loss of $196 million today, the first in its 17-year history. It follows costly write-downs and payouts and over-optimistic forecasting. Fonterra is undertaking a review to address its financial performance, and Duncan Cool, the chair of the Fonterra Shareholders Council, says he remains optimistic.
Not unexpected given the announcements that were made a couple of weeks ago in terms of the forecast earnings downgrade. All the same, not very palatable as a farmer shareholder and investor in our co-op. The business clearly needs to do a lot better than it's done this year, and I'm confident that that will happen.
The Fonterra Shareholders Council Chair Duncan Cool. The Speaker, Trevor Mallard, has laid a complaint with police and the Department of Conservation after 5 native birds, including 2 bludgeoned keridu, were left on Parliament steps as part of a Ban 1080 protest. Mr Mallard says he's viewed video footage of what happened during the protest yesterday, but wouldn't be making it public as it would likely be part of court proceedings. It's illegal to kill or be in possession of native birds, and testing of the birds so far points to the keridu being victims of blunt force trauma. The offence carries a penalty of imprisonment up to 2 years or a fine not exceeding $100,000 or both. Mr Mallard says while he's supportive of protest action, this particular display was offensive behaviour and regrettable, particularly given school children were involved in delivering the dead birds to Parliament. Ban 1080 protesters yesterday claimed the birds were killed as a result of government-led 1080 poison drops. The Police Association says the near miss for 2 police officers confronted with a shotgun in Auckland last night shows the urgent need for law reform to stop criminals getting their hands on guns. The pair had pulled over a car in Otahuhu when the driver ran towards them with a sawn-off shotgun and pulled the trigger twice, but the safety catch was on. The association's president, Chris Cahill, says it was only luck that prevented them from being injured or killed.
I'd like to say that these incidents are rare, but things very similar to it are not. There's just so many firearms out there in the hands of criminals, and our officers are telling us every day of the risks they're facing with criminals having access to these firearms.
Chris Cahill says the problem is there's no registry of firearms in New Zealand, so no one knows how many firearms there are, who has them and where they are. Tests show dust that's coating cars in a Lower Hutt industrial suburb contains asbestos. Following a fire at Chair Solutions in July, the site was supposed to be maintained by the owners to ensure asbestos in the roof did not spread to surrounding areas. But painter Jason Fecto had the dust coating his car tested this week, and it was revealed to be positive for asbestos. He thinks more should be done to mitigate the risk.
All I can say is that if this structure were dropped in the CBD, it would be wrapped within 2 hours. There's no way it should be exposed like that. And if you're exposed to this day in and day out without that being wrapped, you probably would suffer the consequences down the track.
Hutt Valley painter Jason Fecto. A Te Reo Māori advocate says the large turnout to a Te Reo Māori hikoi in Auckland CBD is proof the future of the language is strong. Thousands of people joined in the hikoi today, which made its way down Queen Street to Aotea Square. Robert Pouwhare helped to present the Māori language petition to Parliament in 1972. He says he's proud to see the large number of kura kaupapa students at the hikoi.
Some people say our language is dying and teetering on the verge of extinction. I don't believe that. I don't believe it at all.
Macha Robert Pouwhare. Another language hikoi in Auckland will be held tomorrow in Manukau. A cancer specialist wants an emergency fund for dying patients who have been denied access to a life-prolonging drug. 2 women with terminal bowel cancer who cannot tolerate regular chemo have spoken publicly about their unsuccessful attempts to get access to an alternative chemo drug, Tomudex. They were refused the drug under an exceptional circumstances scheme managed by drug buyer Pharmac. A Wellington specialist, Kate Clark, says she understands Pharmac has withdrawn the scheme for these patients while it considers whether to approve wider funding. She says that leaves patients funding the drug themselves or, if they cannot, with only months to live.
What we would like is, when there is a situation like this, that a temporary approval or a bridging program could be set up so that while the 2 to 3 year process is being worked through, patients who need the drug now get the drug, have the drug available to them.
Dr. Kate Clark. It's 5:05. Sport. The All Blacks coach Steve Hansen isn't backing away from his claims that New Zealand rugby needs government money to stay at the top of the sport and combat player drain. Hansen was responding to comments from former All Black Lima Sopoaga, who says the money on offer overseas will soon outweigh the lure of the All Blacks jersey. Hansen says the All Blacks brand is worth a lot to New Zealand and is worthy of government investment.
Rugby in this country is an important part of who we are and what we are, and I believe the All Blacks over many years have been a great brand for New Zealand. You can go anywhere in the world and people may not know New Zealand, but they've heard of the All Blacks. I think it's an opportunity for us to take New Zealand to the rest of the world by using that brand, and that's why I mentioned they should be one of our sponsors.
Steve Hansen has named his strongest possible team for Saturday night's clash with South Africa in Wellington, with midfielder Sonny Bill Williams a late withdrawal due to illness. Meanwhile, All Black centurion Ma'a Nonu has signed a 1-year deal to play for the Blues in next year's Super Rugby season, returning to New Zealand after 3 years in France. A 2-year absence from the Silver Ferns hasn't counted against Laura Langman, with the veteran mid-quarter named the new captain of the side. Langman replaces Katrina Grant, who was skipper during the side's disappointing Commonwealth Games campaign. However, Grant has been made vice-captain, and Langman says she sees them as sharing the leadership.
The fortunate thing for Polly and I is we've actually played in both positions. I've been her vice, so we have worked together, and I've really enjoyed it. So to be fair, if anything, I probably see it as co-captains.
Laura Langman, that's the news.
Protecting the environment.
They feel that they need the pigs left in the forest so they can go chase them. So I have said, well, are you pig farming or are we saving the forest?
Saving Auckland's golf courses.
If it wasn't the golfers, it wouldn't even be here. You know, we've kept it alive, we paid for it.
Preserving the Australian anthem.
Here we have a kid who's been brainwashed. And I tell you what, I'd give her a kick up the backside.
Save the dates. Morning reports every weekday from 6. Then on 9 to noon, Paul Fronzak on his intense search to discover who he is, decades after being mistaken as a kidnapped infant and handed to the wrong parents. After 11, new music releases from Paul McCartney, Spiritualised and The Chills. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland fine today, cloudy periods tomorrow. Auckland to Wellington, including the central high country, mostly cloudy with patchy drizzle, mainly about the ranges. Afternoon fine breaks. Coromandel and Bay of Plenty, fine spells. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Nelson and Canterbury, fine with high cloud today. Bulla, drizzle developing this afternoon, turning to rain tomorrow, then gradually clearing. Westland and Fiordland, rain in Fiordland gradually spreading to Westland today with possible heavy falls, easing to isolated showers south of the glaciers by evening and gradually clearing everywhere tomorrow. Otago and Southland, scattered rain in the west, clearing this afternoon and becoming fine everywhere. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods at 5:08. And you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten, and thank you everyone for being with us. Welcome to Checkpoint. We begin tonight with Fonterra. The dairy giant today announced the first annual loss in its 17-year history. That's a more than usually significant profit result in the life of this country. Fonterra is New Zealand's largest company. And while its net loss of $196 million included a big payment to Danone and a write-down on its Being Mate investment in China, the company hastened to state and then repeated a simple message: it can and must and will do better. The language was willfully reassuring. Interim CEO Miles Hurrell says Fonterra has a major review in the works to address its financial performance. But analysts are concerned that it's developed a bit of a pattern of overpromising and under-delivering. Lots of coverage on Fonterra tonight. We begin with Annika Smith and this report.
So the headline number is good, but where we haven't performed is in our earnings and forecasting. It's certainly not where we wished to end up.
The chair of the country's biggest company, John Monaghan, delivering the bad news. The first loss in the dairy giant's history, and one that was bigger than they predicted. Fonterra's interim chief executive, Miles Hurrell, admits they were caught by surprise.
Our forecasts were too optimistic. Also, the commodity prices, which is the input costs for our business, were stronger in the second half than we had assumed. We have a clear plan around how we're going to lift our performance, and this involves us doing things differently.
ASB's senior rural economist Nathan Penny says a worrying trend is emerging. He says the loss is grabbing headlines, but there's a worrying pattern of underperformance.
The sort of pattern of Fonterra starting the year and issuing its sort of forecast for the year for its profit or its earnings, and generally over the last few years they haven't hit those targets, and that is a worrying trend as well.
Mr Penny says at least the milk price is still strong, meaning that Fonterra's thousands of farmer shareholders won't be hit too hard. But he says that's not enough to make the company a success.
Some of the key challenges for Fonterra is getting that balance between paying its farmers well for their milk, but also being able to add value to that milk in the form of consumer-based products.
The chair of Fonterra Shareholders Association, Duncan Cool, says the result is extremely disappointing, but not unexpected.
As farmer shareholders, we deal with ups and downs on a daily basis, so nothing new in this. Frustration that as farmers we have control over many levers in our own business, but we don't have full control over other levers.
And he's confident Fonterra can turn things around.
I think the first thing that Fonterra board and management need to do is, in terms of believing, is deliver results. So I guess that's the call out from us, is that get some runs on the board and let's start building some confidence back again.
Fonterra's chair John Monaghan says the company is putting plans in place to avoid being too optimistic about its forecasting in the future.
It really goes back to what's been said before. On the one hand, it's taking full stock of the business. It's really getting our basics right, going back to basics, and improving our forecasting. And that's about looking at all of the assumptions that we have, understanding the upsides and downsides, and making sure we're taking a full and balanced approach and investing accordingly.
The company says despite its troubled being mate venture, its business in China, its largest market, is doing very well, with 11% of all dairy consumed in the country coming from Fonterra, an appetite that the dairy giant hopes will continue to grow. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Annika Smith aho.
Now, our business reporter Madison Reedy was at the announcement today, and after 5:30 in the business slot, she's going to turn her attentions to Fonterra. How was what Fonterra said, its rhetorical flourishes when trying to cope with that loss, greeted by the people who matter most, that's its shareholders and the people who trade in Fonterra's products. All of that coming up after 5:30. But we turn now to Mycoplasma bovis, or return to it because we've covered it at length, of course. Tonight we can reveal some farmers have culled stock and put in compensation applications before MPI had instructed them to do so. Last night on Checkpoint we spoke to a sheep and beef farm consultant, Graham Butcher, about Mycoplasma bovis and how long it was taking for affected farmers to be paid compensation. Today we asked MPI why it was taking so long in some cases. M. bovis has been found, eradication and culling had been ordered and completed, and the original intention was to pay compensation within as little as 10 days. And in asking MPI what caused any delays, we were told it wasn't always the claims themselves, but broader confusion about who was eligible to claim.
Now, we've had scenarios where farmers have culled animals without any direction from MPI and then asked for compensation.
That's Jeff Gwynn, Director of Readiness and Response for MPI. He was talking as part of a broader interview about M. bovis and compensation. And he was saying it can sometimes take longer to compensate farmers than MPI would hope because of complicating factors. He then told us they've received claims from farmers who've culled stock despite being under no order to cull. I was confused, so I asked him. They were farms under a notice of direction, weren't they?
In some instances, no.
So are you telling me that farmers on farms that weren't under a notice of direction have culled stock?
What I'm telling you, John, is that we have had some claims submitted to us where MPI has exercised no power at all.
You've had claims submitted to you from farms where it hasn't even been proven there is M. bovis?
We've had farmers act without any direction from MPI. or any controls being put on them by MPI.
Jeff, can you but can you clarify that for a townie? So farmers have culled stock without there being a notice of direction, without there being any relationship with MPI, and without there being even suspected M. bovis on their farms.
What it has meant, John, is we have been in contact with some farmers. We've exercised no powers whatsoever, but they've acted prematurely and unilaterally with that, and we have not exercised any power for them to actually ask them to do that.
So because the problem with New Zealand is the people who know this stuff really know it, and the rest of us are a bit bewildered by it. You're telling me farmers have culled stock without MPI requiring them to?
That's correct. We have had claims along those lines.
Jeff Gwynn wouldn't elaborate for privacy reasons, but he did say none of those farmers have received compensation. Back to the interview. Can you tell me roughly how many farmers have done that?
Oh, look, it's probably a handful, but it still causes some concern for those farmers who believe they have a valid claim.
And that's important. This isn't, it seems, a willful attempt to defraud. It's just that the farmer acted before MPI had said they needed to act. In part, that may have been out of fear, in part out of a desire to deal with the issue as quickly as possible and move on. But Checkpoint believes there's a larger issue here, and that's that some farmers still aren't always complying with NAIT. Now, for townies, and most of us are, NAIT is the National Livestock Identification and Trading Scheme, designed and intended to monitor the whereabouts of stock, including after sale or transfer. But not all farmers are fully compliant. 6 years after NAIT was introduced as a control and monitoring system, Osprey, which runs NAIT, is still issuing warning letters for farmer non-compliance. Here's Jeff Gwynn, who says compliance rates are up, but not universal.
Osprey itself has issued a number of warning letters, and there has been an uplift in performance as a result of that.
Sorry, but the number of how many warning letters have been issued?
I think they've issued some, it's done on a monthly basis, so I think last month was around 300.
Yes, that's 300 warning letters in a single month, and in an environment in which rigorous stock monitoring would seem advantageous for all.
We also have had our, for want of a better word, booze bus operations, where we've worked at Police Commercial Vehicle Investigation Unit stop checkpoints and actually looked for NAIT and ASD compliance. And we have a number of ongoing investigations, and I think its last count it was around 40.
That's for NAIT non-compliance. In short, MPI says it's going step by step in M. bovis diagnosis, eradication and compensation, because sometimes compensation claims have been premature and possibly not warranted at all. But Checkpoint believes it may also be because there have been occasions on which the information on stock movements NAIT compliance might have provided hasn't been fully available. So, are MPI happy with their time frame for paying out compensation which is due?
The target we've set ourselves, John, is 10 days, and we're meeting that on about 70% of occasions. Those that we don't meet tend to be within 10 to 20 days. So it's still not as fast as I'd like it to be, but it's significantly faster than it has been.
That's at odds with what Ben Walling told us, a highly regarded Winton-based farmer whose claims are absolutely legitimate and follow MPI diagnosis of M. bovis, which saw eradication orders issued and 1,700 animals culled.
Compensation is very slow and painful, and when is that's going to be sorted out? Like we're 8-9 months waiting for some compensation.
Have you had to go into debt to repopulate your farm?
Yeah, we basically borrowed $1,060,000 a week or two ago to restock. It's a lot of things are coming to light in the last few weeks, which are starting to get a bit depressing.
Jeff Gwynn says they're getting there.
75% of Ben's claims have been paid. If he feels that those claims didn't meet his expectations, we do have the ability for people to ask for a reassessment. And off the back end of that, there's always mediation and arbitration. Ben
Walling may find himself part of a larger complexity. Whilst there's still a relatively small number of M. bovis properties, here's Jeff Gwynn again.
We've got 37 infected properties as we speak, and that's part of the 57 we have under restricted place notice.
The number of stock involved is substantially larger. How many stock have so far been culled?
So we're sitting now at about 39,000, so we've depopulated 30 properties and we're in the process of doing another 43.
And how much money has been paid out so far in compensation?
So beginning of the week we paid out or offered to pay out around 21 million out of a assessed total of 27.
The broader picture here is the jigsaw puzzle. Ben Walling is not one of these farmers, but some have claimed for GST, for example, and that's not being paid. Others, as we've heard, have claimed before MPI had even determined they were eligible to claim. And Nate non-compliance, and again, this isn't Ben Walling, will have slowed things down. It may be slower in some instances than they'd like, but MPI says, first and foremost, they need to get it right.
We believe we're being very fair, but in some instances farmers are asking for things that aren't compensatable.
It's Jeff Gwynn from MPI. A couple of issues here. We'd love to hear from you if you're one of the bovis farmers. There's so few of you, though, and I think we've dealt with many of you already, but do text us 2101. The other issue is Nate. And that system, is it working? Are there still issues with us? Do be in touch, 2101, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Let's go to Otago and the Dunedin City Council-owned lines company, Aurora Energy. Now, you may remember our recent stories about the company, including a power pole in the Dunedin suburb of Green Island, which was red-tagged or slated for replacement 3 years ago, only to have the tag removed and then re-tagged this year and urgently replaced. All very confusing. All the story about poles on its network, which are almost a century old, some of which have been red-tagged, then unred-tagged. More confusion. Tonight, our Otago Southern reporter Timothy Brown has obtained information which shows in February of last year, more than 1/6 of Aurora's poles were deemed unsafe enough to require replacement. And what's more, the company says it can't guarantee the safety of its network.
In March last year, there were 9,504 red-tagged power poles on Aurora's network, according to their own geographic information system. More than 2/3 of those, or 6,552, were deemed condition 0. In other words, in need of replacement within 3 months. By mid-November, that number had mysteriously dropped to just under 1,800. Why? Well, nobody can tell us. What we do know is that during that period, only 2,250 new poles went into the ground. We don't know how many were red-tagged, and it appears neither does Aurora. So what happened to the at least 5,500 poles deemed unsafe in February last year that were suddenly serviceable 9 months later? Former Aurora employee and whistleblower Richard Healy believes he has the answer.
So I've been reconditioned by removing the red tags with a claw hammer, is my guess. There are 7,000 poles which apparently have been addressed by Aurora in that time frame that should have been replaced within a year. It's an impossibility and it didn't happen. Their own figures show that for all reasons 2,200 odd poles were installed in that period.
Checkpoint asked Aurora how many red-tagged poles it replaced in that period. We also asked how many red-tagged poles it staked or reinforced in that time, and how poles can go from needing replacement within 3 months to perfectly safe. The company refused to be interviewed, but in a statement said this.
Rather than go back and analyse the historical situation, what's important is the current state of the network and the ongoing maintenance and renewal program, which is the subject of an independent review.
So we asked Aurora outright, in yes or no terms, is the network safe? Here's what they said.
No one can provide an absolute guarantee that any aspect of life is risk-free.
Richard Healy believes he can answer the question of safety.
The only way to address those poles correctly is to replace them. Now, Aurora have undertaken a program of reinforcement. Now, the reinforcement's particularly problematic. It means driving a steel member down beside the pole and strapping the pole to it. Unfortunately, that does not return the pole to a safe condition.
One measure of the safety of the network is how many poles fell over last year.
So Aurora won't release the figures, and in fact I'm told Aurora probably don't have the figures, but my sources tell me that there were 21 poles that failed in service last year.
And failed in service to layman's is fell over?
Yeah, it fell over.
Once again, an Aurora spokesperson has reiterated they will speak to us once the review is complete. But they have repeatedly said, through the media and privately to politicians, they'll be transparent. Despite that, they've rejected repeated requests for interviews by Checkpoint. So we went to their owners, the Dunedin City Council, for answers. Dunedin Mayor Dave Cull and the council's chief executive, Dr Sue Bidrose, declined our interview requests. But in a statement, Mr Cull says the questions raised by Checkpoint are matters for Aurora. Richard Healy says the lack of transparency is maddening.
Aurora have had 2 years since I went public to sort their act out. They've had 100 years before that to sort their act out. The chairman of the board has assured us on many occasions that they have sorted their act out and that the public can be happy with the level of safety provided by the network. Now, the network is in a shambolic state.
Aurora says the review will be complete at the end of October. Kei o te poti aho, mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Timothy Brown tēnei.
25 minutes past 5. Again, if you're in Dunedin and have opinions on that story, we'd love to hear from you. The All Blacks coach, Steve Hansen, isn't backing away from his claims that New Zealand rugby needs government money to stay at the top of the sport and keep the country's best talent on shore. Hansen was responding to comments from former All Black Lima Sopoaga, now playing in England, who says the money on offer overseas will soon outweigh the lure of the All Blacks jersey. The All Blacks today named their strongest possible side to play the Springboks on Saturday in Wellington, bringing back big guns such as Beauden Barrett, Ryan Crotty and Sam Cane as they attempt to wrap another rugby championship title in their final home test of the year. As Joe Porter reports, Hansen insists the current financial model isn't sustainable and says if the government and New Zealanders want the All Blacks to remain the best in the world, investment is required.
Barrett is chasing. This is Beauden Barrett. Control this. And the cup is his. It's New Zealand. The All Blacks still the kings of World Rugby.
The All Blacks became the first team to win back-to-back World Cups in 2015, cementing their place on World Rugby's throne. Coach Steve Hansen says if they're to stay there, New Zealand Rugby needs more money and he wants the government or taxpayers to front up.
Rugby in this country is an important part of who we are and what we are, and I believe the All Blacks over many years have been a great brand for New Zealand. You can go anywhere in the world and people may not know New Zealand, but they've heard of the All Blacks. I think it's an opportunity for us to take New Zealand to the rest of the world by using that brand, and that's why I mentioned they should be one of our sponsors.
Former All Black first five Lima Sopoaga adding fuel to Hansen's fire, suggesting players are becoming increasingly aware of the shortness of their careers and claiming the lure of the All Blacks jersey is waning in the face of big money offers that can set them and their families up for life. Hansen concedes that's particularly true of players from lower socio-economic backgrounds and says it's a constant battle New Zealand Rugby are fighting.
We'll always understand that people are going to go overseas, particularly some of the Pacifica boys who are supporting just more than themselves. So, we've got to keep thinking of ways and means of how we can keep this big machine going, because it's not going to just do it by itself.
So Hansen and New Zealand Rugby look set to pressure the government for taxpayer funding, but nothing like the pressure South Africa are under to perform on Saturday night. They've lost 3 of their last 4 games, and the last time they played in New Zealand, they were crushed 57-0. Coach Rassi Erasmus believes his head could roll if they suffer another heavy defeat in Wellington.
We're under the pump. We lost 2 in a row, but we had to fix it long term. We want to be number 1, 2 and 3 in the world again, not number 6, 7 and 8. So, if at cost, I have to go, then it is what it is.
And flanker Francois Lure concedes Springbok fans will be calling for a green and gold cull should they fail.
Yeah, there will be. As I said, quite a competitive nation, very results driven. There's a big expectancy for the Springboks to win always, every single game.
On the flip side, Erasmus knows just what a victory would do for his side's confidence.
The moment you beat New Zealand in New Zealand, you're back to where you want to be, and your planning is probably on track, and you can tell yourself, listen, we're really contenders next year at the World Cup. You beat New Zealand in New Zealand, life's good.
However, history suggests life won't be good for Erasmus and the Springboks on Saturday. South Africa haven't won in New Zealand in almost a decade and have never won at Westpac Stadium. Mō te hōtaka o te ahipo nei, ko Joe Porter aho.
The first KiwiBuild apartments under the government's Buying Off the Plans initiative have been launched in Onehunga. The ballot to buy one of the 25 new apartments due to be completed by August next year will open next week. Tom Furley was there.
One of the 3 rundown houses on Onehunga's main street met its end this morning at the hands of a 20-tonne digger. It marks the start of NZ Living's 42 apartment development, of which 25 will be for KiwiBuild first home buyers. 6 studios will cost $380,000 a pop, with 12 one-bedroom apartments going for $490,000 each and 7 two-bedroom properties for $600,000. It's the first private development announced under the government's Buying Off the Plans initiative. Housing Minister Phil Twyford explains how it will work.
KiwiBuild will underwrite affordable KiwiBuild homes for first home buyers, and what that means is that we contractually agree with the developer a price at which KiwiBuild would buy these properties if they're not sold in the normal course of the marketing of the new development.
The developer, Shane Brearley, says it cuts out the costs of marketing and staging the apartments, essentially leaving them free to get on with it.
With this model, you can get underway straight away. We settled this land about 2 months ago, so we've only owned it for 2 months. We're under construction as of today. Now, if it was a non-Kiwi build, it may be that we couldn't start for 6, maybe 12 months. By the time we had enough pre-sales to be able to get bank finance to be able to start construction.
He says developers often need 60 to 70% of homes sold before they can get finance. The announcement comes after private developers pitched their plans to the government back in June. 97 put their plans forward, and so far 4 have signed contracts with the government, 3 more are awaiting sign-off from ministers, and 42 are still in negotiations. Half were rejected as they either don't fit the criteria or weren't established developers. The head of KiwiBuild, Stephen Barclay, says they were caught off guard by the level of interest and they've had to gear up for it.
We received proposals from two-man bands, to right through to major developers, from developments, as you say, of 5 or 6 or whatever, right through to thousands, and I literally mean thousands of houses. And so, that sort of added to the complexity of trying to work our way through these things.
Stephen Barclay says they'll reopen the scheme in the coming months to kickstart more projects. The timing is important. KiwiBuild is a flagship policy for the government, which has a target of building 1,000 KiwiBuild homes by the middle of next year. So far, just 18 have been completed, out at Papakura's McLennan development, and the announcements so far account for only about 50. Nevertheless, Phil Twyford is confident they'll meet or even exceed the target.
In excess of 200 or so new homes will be built in Housing New Zealand developments like McLennan, where we're mixing affordable KiwiBuild homes in amongst redevelopment of state housing land. But the bulk of the supply for this first 12 months is going to be delivered through the Buying Off the Plans scheme, where we're partnering directly with developers. And they're going to be a mix of some greenfields, some brownfields, some standalone homes, some apartment complexes like this one. And in the coming weeks, we're going to be announcing projects in a number of different parts of the country.
Phil Twyford says developments are in train for cities like Queenstown, Hamilton, Tauranga and Wellington. The ballot for the Onehunga Mall development is due to open in the next few days. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
Thanks for being with us on Checkpoint. Coming up before 6, sewing needles have been found in strawberries sold at Woolworths supermarkets in Queensland. Oncologists demand money be provided for last chance drugs for dying patients. She's been in the job just 4 days. Newly crowned Silver Ferns head coach Nolene Taurua on her team's first international this weekend against England. Would love your feedback. 2101 is the text number. Madison Reedy next with Fonterra and that announcement today and what people make of it. And I think, KB, that's how you're going to start the headlines.
I am. An economist says Fonterra's annual loss reflects a worrying pattern of underperformance. The dairy cooperative announced an after-tax loss of $196 million today, the first in its 17-year history. Nathan Penny, ASB's senior rural economist, says there's a worrying pattern of overpromising and under-delivering financially. Speaker Trevor Mallard has complained to the police and DOC after 5 native birds, including 2 bludgeoned kereru, were left on Parliament steps as part of an anti-1080 protest yesterday. It's illegal to kill or possess native birds, and testing so far indicates the kereru are the victim of blunt force trauma. Protesters claim the birds died as a result of 1080 poison drops. Winston Peters says he's mistaken and that all his MPs have not signed a good behaviour contract. The National Party has lodged a parliamentary complaint over New Zealand First's constitution, which states its MPs are liable to a $300,000 fine if they resign from the caucus but stay on in Parliament. Last month, Mr Peters said his MPs had all signed up, but he now says his memory was wrong. The Police Association says a close shave for 2 police officers confronted by a man brandishing a sawn-off shotgun highlights the urgent need for reforms to stop criminals getting their hands on firearms. The pair pulled over a car in the Auckland suburb of Otahuhu last night when the driver ran towards them with a shotgun and pulled the trigger twice, but the safety catch was on. The association says only luck prevented the officers from being injured or killed. The Prime Minister is pleased a decision has been made about the new stadium in Christchurch. The Christchurch City Council voted today to spend $220 million of a government fund on the stadium. Some residents feel the money would be better spent on rebuilding council-owned properties damaged in the quakes. Jacinda Ardern says the council has done what residents asked it to do. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten, which is 24.5 minutes away. Madison Reedy's on the other side of me. Hi, Madison. We're going to go back to our lead story tonight, which was the Fonterra result. You were at the media conference. Let's talk about, first of all, the announcement, how it was received, the mood in the room.
The mood in the room was probably what I would call frosty. It was very tense. The Chief Financial Officer, the Chairman in the middle, and the Chief Executive Officer kind of all sat there in a row and, and faced off to a swath of media. I mean, there was everyone that you could imagine in that room from every single media organisation there. That was only about 2 hours after they announced that $196 million loss, which we expected. So analysts and investors aren't all too gutted about that.
And there were some one-offs in there, right? The day known and the being made.
Exactly, and we knew all of that at the half year as well. And I said last night that what they say and how they say it is more important. And what they said was good. The market was pretty happy with that. They said that they would review that being made investment and every single other asset, joint venture, partnership, company that owns every single thing it has a hand in. It's going to relook at it. So that was taken well. But there was certainly an elephant in the room, or an elephant not in the room, I should say. The former Chief Executive Teo Spearings was not there. Those results were on his shoulders and he didn't front to them today. The chairman didn't even say whether or not he was asked to front those results. And I also asked the chairman a question, John Manahan, at the press conference today. This was certainly what I would call a frosty response. I asked him about how farmers had to feel the wrath of their investment decisions. Take a listen. To what extent do you believe that your shareholder farmers have had to subsidise the poor investment decisions made by previous members of the board?
We had to make a very tough but necessary decision to support the relative strength of our balance sheet. It's not something a board ever wants to do, to go to your milk price and do that, but we needed to. And we're very transparent about the reason.
Are they transparent? Is it persuasive? In Annika Smith's story at the top of the checkpoint, we had analysts saying Fonterra are getting really good at selling us kind of rhetorical good intentions. But it's the delivery we want to see now.
There was certainly a lack of detail. When they even mentioned that review, they didn't say, what measures would be involved in that. I asked all of the three that were sitting there too what they would ask of all of their joint ventures, partnerships and all the companies that they have stakeholdings in. They, didn't say what they would be asking. They did mention with being made that it had a new chief executive, so things weren't all too bad there. But they certainly... Analysts have said today that certainly them saying that they will review everything is certainly a signal in the right direction. And the markets today actually responded pretty well. So the Fonterra Shareholders Fund, which is listed on the New Zealand Stock Exchange, that actually had an increase today. That lifted up about almost a whole percent, 0.8%. So it was actually pretty well received. So people seem to be pretty happy with what they were told today, whether or not they liked the tone that they were told it in.
Because as you said, and as you said last night, we knew that the result was going to be roughly what it was, in fact almost exactly what it was. What we didn't know was how Fonterra was going to persuade their shareholders, the market and everyone really that they knew what they were doing, and I hate this phrase, I apologise, going forward.
You've told me off for saying that before.
It's an appalling phrase.
In the fine print as well, there was a little bit more. So obviously, they want to increase their earnings, and the way that they say they plan to do that is by reducing its debt levels. So one thing that wasn't so good in the results today as well was that their gearing ratio, which is their debt to equity ratio, was nearing 50%. It was sitting at about 48%. Now that's increased in the past 2 years. So it increased last year. It's increased again, and we've heard this before. So obviously they plan to reduce it. That's how they plan to kind of turn this company around, less reliance on debt and on banks. But we've heard this before. In 2016, the former chief financial officer, not the one that they have now, he told Radio New Zealand, he told us that that they wanted to lower that debt down to 40 to 45%. It's exactly what the chief financial officer said today. So how they plan to achieve that. They didn't actually give us much detail on that when we did push them on it. And they also plan to reduce their capital expenditure. So that's something that came out of the investor briefing call that an analyst told me today. They didn't actually tell that to the media today. They plan to reduce their capital expenditure, their spend on assets and the likes and strategic partnerships down to $650 million for the year. The year just ended. It was actually around $861 million.
Right, so it's a significant reduction.
And over $200 million reduction there.
Okay, very quickly, because we have to move on, but farmer reaction, shareholder reaction?
Farmer shareholder reaction, well, most of that's seen on the NZX Farmer Shareholder Fund, so that actually increased. Pretty happy. I haven't spoken to any farmers. Eric Frickberg was all over that with the rurals, but we certainly did hear from the chairman of the farmers side of Fonterra, and that he said disappointed, where to from here.
Okay, thanks, Madison. Of course, Fonterra is such a big company. How did this impact on the rest of the market today?
Market's closed up. The NZX Top 50 index was up, which would have been driven by that shareholder fund too. So it closed up 0.6%. That's 53 points to 9,248. New Zealand dollars buying at 65.6 US cents, 91.2 Australian, bit of a drop there, and 50.2 British pence.
Nice work, Madison Reedy. And as Madison said, Eric Frickberg will have more on this on Morning Report tomorrow in the Rurals News. Thank you so much. Cancer doctors are demanding that funds be provided for last chance drugs for dying patients. 2 terminally ill bowel cancer patients who cannot tolerate regular chemotherapy have been denied access by Drug Buyer Pharmac to an alternative life-prolonging drug that is funded in Australia and the UK. One is forking out thousands for it herself, and the other, who can't afford it, feels abandoned. Doctors say it's inhumane, lacks compassion and must stop. Health correspondent Karen Brown reports.
Life changed for 50-year-old Aucklander Patricia Tier last year when she was diagnosed with bowel cancer. The solo mother with 2 children under 12 had surgery but couldn't tolerate 2 main chemotherapy options, which provoked life-threatening heart problems on top of everything else. Further bad news was in store, however. An application by her medical specialists at Auckland City Hospital for access to an alternative chemo not funded in this country, Tomadex, was rejected twice. Patricia is receiving hospice care and going day to day.
It's hard. It's horrible and it's hard. I try and be strong all the time.
Doctors say there's a 1 in 1,000 chance of what's happened to Patricia occurring. But yesterday, a Wellington woman, Janet McMenamin, spoke out, saying it's happened to her too. But she can pay $4,000 every 3 weeks for the drug privately, while Patricia cannot. Meantime, Pharmac has ended an exceptional circumstances scheme that both women applied to unsuccessfully for access to Tomadex, while it considers what to do in the future. It's yet to respond to questions from RNZ on the topic. But a Wellington cancer specialist, Kate Clark, says lack of access to Tomadex will cut some patients' life expectancy to a matter of months.
This is not a stubbed toe. This is not, a chronic rash. This is cancer. So when patients don't get treatment, they die.
She's also worried that if Pharmac can end funding under the named Patient Pharmaceutical Assessment Scheme so easily, it could do it again for other groups of patients.
That's the scary thing as medical oncologists, is we're only a little country. There are a fair number of conditions that, thankfully for everybody, only happen 1 in a million a year, and NPPA has been our process to get those medicines funded.
Dr Clark says Pharmac must set aside money to fund last resort drugs in these situations.
What we would like is, when there is a situation like this, that a temporary approval or a bridging program could be set up so that while the 2 to 3 year process is being worked through, patients who need the drug now get the drug, have the drug available to them.
A leading Australian cancer specialist, Chris Karapetis, says Tomadex can prolong life by an average of 6 months to a year, and it appears safe.
It's a very specific situation, so I don't think it would be prescribed commonly, and I know that it's not prescribed commonly in Australia, but it's an option that I'm grateful that I have.
The Health Minister, David Clark, is refusing to interfere in Pharmac or its processes.
I prefer to leave drug buying decisions over to Pharmac. I don't think it's for ministers to second guess the advice of experts in this area.
He says independent decisions are the way to maintain public confidence in drug funding generally. Whether the two terminally ill bowel cancer patients see it that way is another matter. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi ahi, ko Karen Brownaho.
Let's head to the Atlantic coast of the United States. Hurricane Florence has been downgraded to a Category 2 storm as it moves towards the southeastern US, but that doesn't mean the danger has been reduced as much as a reduction from a 4 to a 2 might suggest. While the wind speeds have dropped, the biggest problem is its size and speed. It's slow moving, 800 k wide, and is expected to stall once it makes landfall, which means it could dump as much as 1,000 millimetres of rain in some areas, along with a deadly storm surge. The state of Georgia has joined North and South Carolina, Virginia and Maryland in declaring a state of emergency. The BBC's Chris Buckler is in Wilmington, North Carolina, close to where Florence is expected to come ashore.
Right along the coast of the Carolinas, marinas have been cleared of boats and homes have been emptied of people. Their windows boarded up and shuttered in preparation for Florence.
This is going to be one of the biggest ones to ever hit our country. Residents in the path of these devastating storms should comply with all evacuation orders and other emergency instructions.
The police have been roaming the already quiet streets, warning that before the storm arrives, families living here should leave for their own safety.
We've been here 16 years and we've never had to evacuate.
No, we've had some couple of close calls where we thought the water might rise and on the storm surge, but this one downright scares me.
On Cape Fear, they are closely studying the satellite images of this huge hurricane that's slowly approaching from the Atlantic. No one can be sure where it will land, but along America's east coast, they are being told that the gathering clouds could bring a storm that has an impact for days.
Florence may stall after it makes landfall and then move very slowly south down the coast. This could mean that parts of North and South Carolina near the coast will experience hurricane-force winds and hurricane conditions for 24 hours or more.
It's almost 3 decades since the Carolinas experienced a storm on that kind of scale. Hurricane Hugo is still remembered today. And there has been panic buying of water and other essentials in shops. Even dozens of miles away from the coast, supermarket shelves have been emptied as people stock up ahead of the forecast ferocious winds and rain.
We don't know the devastation of this storm, so.
Forecasters are predicting it could be the storm of a lifetime, and protecting lives here is now the priority along this coastline.
That report from the BBC. Let's head from the US to Christchurch, where the City Council has admitted a clause in the district plan barring coastal residents from renovating or building on their land was a mistake, but fixing the district plan won't be a simple matter. Our reporter Tess Brunton was at today's council meeting and Tess filed this report.
The district plan says developing or using land under threat from rising sea levels or flooding should be avoided. But residents say a key clause exempting single residential property owners has been left out, and that's costing them tens of thousands of dollars and a lot of stress. Some have even accused council staff of deliberately removing the clause. At this morning's meeting, Christchurch Coastal Residents United Warwick Schaefer told councillors the community is stagnating because they can't build.
The stories we've had to sit and listen to of severe loss at personal levels, like some people $20,000, $30,000 just gone, that'll never come back, just trying to get through planning to build a house that they cannot actually build at the moment because of this mistake in the plan.
A notice of motion was raised by Councillor Jani Johansson to amend the plan so residential developments can go ahead if risks to people's safety and property can be mitigated.
It's quite clear that there was an intention of the hearings panel
to have a policy that enabled development provided mitigation could be put in place, and that hasn't translated into a final district plan.
There were cheers in the council chambers when Christchurch City Council voted unanimously to change the district plan. But then the issue became, what's the next step? Early this week, Mayor Leanne Dalzell told residents she would take steps to make sure the exemption was reinserted. But today she said there is no process to change the district plan.
We can't amend our district plan, even to correct it. We don't have the power to do that. So I'm receiving advice from staff. I asked for it a couple of weeks ago. I'll be getting that hopefully by the end of the week, early next week, and that will indicate the different courses of action I could take.
Mayor Dalzell says one thing is clear. Councillors want the plan to be changed to reflect the intention of a panel held for the plan. But it isn't going to be fixed overnight.
The independent hearings panel did not want carte blanche development in these areas. In fact, they explicitly excluded subdivisions.
That was not meant to include building single residential properties. Councillor David East, who is facing disciplinary action after accusing council planning staff of removing the key clause in the first place, says residents have suffered acutely and could themselves have a case for legal action against the council.
There are a number of residents that have suffered badly financially. Just how that pans out in the future is anyone's guess, but we'll wait and see on that one.
The council is expecting an answer about what the next step is within 2 weeks. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, this is Tess Brunton.
Let's cross the Tasman. The police in Australia believe a disgruntled former strawberry farm worker may be responsible for a particularly sinister case of food tampering. Sewing needles have been found in strawberries sold at Woolworths supermarkets in Queensland. It sent shockwaves throughout the industry and sparked a recall across 3 Australian states. Elizabeth Brown filed this report.
I bit into it and I felt something snap. My knee-jerk reaction was to swallow, and what was left over in my mouth was half a sewing needle.
That was Brisbane man Hawani Hearn. He says when he realised what had happened, he went straight to the emergency department at his local hospital for x-rays.
They didn't find anything, sent me on with my day. Later on that evening, I ended up getting some severe abdominal pains and went straight to the Redcliffe ER. From there, more x-rays. I was there till 2 a.m. They ended up informing me that the irritation and the pain could be from fragments of the needle passing through my system. Yeah, I was shaking.
Just a day later, a woman reported she'd found a needle in strawberries she was cutting up for her baby. Health officials and police confirmed that needles had been hidden in at least 3 punnets of strawberries supplied to Woolworths from a southeast Queensland farm. An alert went out to consumers in Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria to dispose or return punnets of 2 brands of strawberries, Berrylicious and Berry Obsession. Both brands have also been removed from the shelves. Jennifer Rowling from the Queensland Strawberry Growers Association says it's believed a disgruntled farm worker is to blame.
Early reports from people associated with the farm sort of indicated that, because it was very much targeted at one farm, it did seem to come across that it may very well be an employee of an ex-employee or a current employee. But we're really leaving that to the Queensland Police to do their investigation and see what the outcome is.
Jennifer Rowling says growers are shell-shocked, saying such an incident could devastate the industry. It's not known at what stage in the picking and packing process the needles were put in, but every punnet of strawberries is completely traceable. Jennifer Rowling says it's believed to be an isolated incident, but if consumers are feeling nervous, they just need to take precautions.
If people are feeling uncomfortable about it, by all means cut them open and just have a look for peace of mind. And then obviously, particularly if they do happen to have a punnet that is one of those labels in their fridge, cut it open, see if there's anything, and if there is, it needs to be reported to police ASAP.
In Queensland, anyone found guilty of deliberately contaminating food to cause public alarm or anxiety faces up to 10 years in jail. It can also apply to anyone interfering with food to stop the public from buying certain goods. For Checkpoint, call Elizabeth Brown, 10A.
7 minutes to 6. The family living in a swamp house in Papakura, Auckland, which the Housing Minister last month labelled Third World, are no longer being evicted. On Tuesday, we had an update from Dawn Robbie, who had been living above the swamp with her partner and 2 young children. She lived there for 21 months without issue, but she was given a 90-day notice. She was being evicted almost immediately after she forced her landlord to fix the home's severe drainage issues by going to the media and the Auckland Council. Today we heard from the property management company who issued her with that notice, Noble Property Management, which is a franchise of Ray White, to say that the 90-day notice has now been lifted. So Zach Fleming asked John McCracken from Ray White's Papatoetoe why Dawn Robbie was issued with an eviction notice in the first place.
It wasn't an eviction notice, it was just a notice to vacate, but we have to obviously formalise the ability for the landlord to take possession back so that the work can be done. They had said that they were wanting to move out and as soon as they possibly could. With the notice to vacate, that gives them 90 days, so it's a fair time to do that. However, if that time had come and they still hadn't found anything, then I'm quite certain that they would not have been subject to any further action.
So why give them 90 days in the first place?
Well, the 90 days, as I said, there has to be, because there is a tenancy agreement in place, the tenants were wanting to move out. The landlord obviously was under pressure because of what had happened and the reports that were done prior to us taking over the management of the property, that listing the work that needs to be done, and particularly the internal work.
Yeah, but you just said that they wanted to leave anyway, and if after 90 days they still hadn't left, then you weren't planning to take any action. What was the 90-day notice for?
Well, as I say, we're not trying to make people homeless, but the 90-day notice was purely it's part of the Act that gives the landlord the ability to take possession back.
Which you just told me he wasn't going to do, so why were they served with a 90-day notice?
Well, this is why it's been withdrawn, because the intent is clearly being misunderstood.
But I'm trying to get from you, what was the intent?
The intent is obviously to try and remedy all the issues that have been identified with the dwelling.
Yeah, sorry, if I can just interrupt you, maybe I'm not making myself quite clear. So that 90-day notice that was served on them, that's not going to rip the bathroom out, that's not going to rip the kitchen out, that's not going to fix any of those problems. So what was the purpose behind that notice? Because you've just acknowledged that they want to leave as fast as they can. Should that 90 days have lapsed, no action was going to be taken against them. So what was the purpose behind the notice in the first place?
Well, as I say, the landlord needs to have the house empty so that he can actually fix all the things that have been identified that need to be repaired. The tenants felt, obviously from all the reports, that this was putting a hammer over their head, effectively, trying to force them out of the property. So this is why we said to them, listen, the best thing that can happen is actually withdraw the 90-day notice so there is no pressure, or they don't feel any pressure. It was probably done without thinking through all the connotations and what the tenant may have felt from that as far as pressure. We've spoken to him about that today. He completely understands that, and that's why that 90-day notice has been withdrawn.
I find that quite astonishing, that as a property management company you don't understand the pressure that issuing a tenant with a 90-day notice can cause. You're evicting someone, you're telling them that they have 90 days to leave a property, and you don't understand the stress that could cause someone?
Well, all tenancy agreements have that as part of the tenancy agreement that they sign. Every tenant has that, and it's every landlord's right to take a property back.
Absolutely, but what I'm getting at, sorry, perhaps I'm not making myself very clear again. What I'm getting at is you just told me that you didn't quite appreciate the impact issuing them with a 90-day notice would have. And what I'm trying to say is that as a property management company, this is what you do day in, day out. I find it astonishing that you wouldn't understand the impact that would have.
Well, we do understand it, but also equally that the tenant had made it very clear that they were looking at other properties and were wanting to move out immediately.
It's John McCracken from Noble Property Management at Ray White in Papatoetoe. Tenancy Services, a branch of the Ministry of Business and Innovation and Employment, is looking to prosecute Dawn Robbie's landlord Avan Raj on behalf of her and her family. Obviously, we'll update you on what takes place there. An enormous amount of feedback coming in tonight. Let's go through it. Karen Brown filed a story on people not being able to get the cancer drugs they wanted. Meanwhile, we had Joe Porter's story on Steve Hansen wanting more money from the government, and lots of you have commented on that. This from Susan says, Kia ora, John, what should government prioritise? Cancer treatment, nurses, teachers, All Blacks? Now, Mihi, someone goes even stronger than that and says if the government funds the All Blacks, they'll stop paying taxes. Some fairly strong responses. I think, Steve, if you're listening, I wouldn't have a whip round amongst the RNZ audience just quietly, because the texts are overwhelmingly against government funding for the All Blacks. Nate, and the issue of Mycoplasma bovis and the system for monitoring the movement of stock control. This from Julian, who was a farmer in North Otago. Regarding Nate, one of the reasons for non-compliance is the bloody awful website. To call it user vicious would be charitable. Were it not for my wife, the IT guru, I would be non-compliant. Furthermore, Osprey and Nate before them have known for years that compliance was low. They chose not to act. And from Dunedin, Aurora's woeful power pole network, ditto for DCC's building control, housing stock. Nothing could be easier for me than to show the woefully non-compliant 660 balcony collapse that I've been blowing the whistle on for 2 years now. There's a lot of anger from Dunedin about the state of infrastructure and assets there. Thank you for your texts. 2101 is the number. It's coming up to 6.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batten tēnei. An economist says Fonterra's annual loss reflects a worrying pattern of underperformance. The dairy cooperative announced an after-tax loss of $196 million today following a big write-downs and troubled leadership. Nathan Penny, ASB's senior rural economist, says there's a worrying pattern of over-promising and under-delivering financially.
The sort of pattern of Fonterra starting the year and issuing its sort of forecast for the year for its profit or its earnings, and generally over the last few years they haven't hit those targets, and that is a worrying trend as well.
Nathan Penny says the silver lining is that the milk price remains strong. Parliament Speaker has complained to the Department of Conservation and the police regarding a Ban 1080 protest involving the bludgeoned carcasses of native birds. Trevor Mallard says he's been told it's unlikely that the birds, including 2 kereru and 2 weka, were killed by 1080 poison, as the protesters suggested. They also hurled around fake 1080 pellets yesterday, which were cleaned up by specialist dock staff. Mr Mallard says there'll be a further toxicology report to establish exactly how the protected birds died.
But the expert advice is that the birds were almost certainly bludgeoned to death.
Trevor Mallard says he won't be releasing any of the video footage of the birds being brought to Parliament because he expects it to end up in court. Pharmac says up to 250 bowel cancer patients a year are unable to tolerate current chemotherapy drugs. It follows criticism about the plight of 2 women who have terminal bowel cancer but cannot tolerate chemo drugs and who applied unsuccessfully for access to the unfunded drug Tomudex. They applied under an exceptional circumstances scheme, which cancer doctors say has been withdrawn while Pharmac considers wider funding. Pharmac says in a statement it's approved 7 applications for its Tomudex since 2012, but changed its approach in 2016 based on new information. It says up to 250 patients a year would experience toxicity from current chemo drugs, and it's considering a more suitable process to manage it. It's received a funding application for Tomudex, which is not registered, and is considering it. The Dunedin City Council-owned lines company Aurora Energy won't explain how more than 5,000 power poles on its network went from requiring replacement for safety reasons to being serviceable. In March last year, there were 9,504 power poles needing replacement, according to the company's own data. By mid-November, that number had dropped to just under 1,800, despite only 2,250 new poles being installed on the network, which covers a large tract of Otago. Richard Healy, who exposed the state of the network 2 years ago, says replacing that number of poles just didn't happen.
They've been reconditioned by removing the red tags with a claw hammer, is my guess. There are 7,000 poles which apparently have been addressed by Aurora in that time frame that should have been replaced within a year.
Richard Healy. Aurora says the information is historical and what is important is the current state of the network. The New Zealand First leader Winston Peters says he was mistaken when he said all his MPs had signed up to a good behaviour contract. The National Party had lodged a parliamentary complaint over New Zealand First's constitution, which states its MPs are liable to a $300,000 fine if they resign from the caucus but stay on in Parliament. Last month, Mr Peters said his MPs had all signed up, but he now says his memory was wrong. Asked whether that was just convenient, Mr Peters told reporters it was a fact. He says regardless, the provision is now obsolete due to the impending passage of the waka jumping bill. Hurricane Florence has weakened into a Category 2 hurricane as it moves towards the east coast of the United States, but a life-threatening storm surge and heavy rainfall are still expected. Florence is located about 520 kilometres east-southeast of Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, with maximum sustained winds of 175 kilometres per hour. The storm is moving toward the northwest at 28 kilometres per hour. The Prime Minister is pleased a decision has been made about the new stadium in Christchurch. The Christchurch City Council voted today to spend $220 million of a government fund on the stadium. Some residents feel the money would be better spent on rebuilding council-owned properties damaged in the quakes. Jacinda Ardern says they want to help accelerate the rebuild of infrastructure in the city, and the council has done what residents asked it to do.
Councils and government have multiple issues that they're dealing with at any given time. When it comes to infrastructure, there's been a strong call from the community around the stadium, and council's responding to that.
Jacinda Ardern. It's 6:05. To sport, the 141 Test veteran Laura Langman says she's extremely proud to have been named Silver Ferns captain. Langman replaces Katrina Grant, who was at the helm during the side's disappointing Commonwealth Games campaign. Langman will lead New Zealand against England in their opening Quad Series test in Auckland on Saturday night.
Really special to be given the title, but for me, I want everybody to be leading and everybody to be contributing, and I love it when the young ones are calling me out. I think it's just fantastic and a really good sign of the internal competition that we're trying to establish in our environment.
The new Silver Ferns captain, Laura Langman. The much-awaited return of Sonny Bill Williams to the All Blacks will have to wait another few weeks after the midfielder was a late scratching from the side to play South Africa due to illness. Williams was named on the bench for Saturday's test in Wellington, having not played for the All Blacks since June after recovering from a shoulder injury. However, coach Steve Hansen this afternoon pulled him out of the team.
He's had tonsillitis all week, and in the end of the day it was whether we chuck him out in the reserve bench and flatten him if he has to come on and play 80 minutes or you know, take the risk that he only has to play 20. So in the end he's too valuable to do that too.
Steve Hansen. All Black centurion Ma'anonu has signed a one-year deal to play Super Rugby for the Blues next season. The 36-year-old midfielder returns to New Zealand after 3 years playing in France. And the new Ranfurly Shield holders Waikato put the log of wood on the line for the first time tonight when they host Hawke's Bay in Hamilton. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Alison Balance looks at the science of Christianity, or at least its spread across the Pacific. And our overseas correspondent Silva Tamba is on the line from Estonia, possibly happy Russia's latest military exercises are in Siberia, rather than the Baltic.
Who's that sniggering in the background? Is that you, Colin Peacock?
It's me, and I was just thinking there was some highly sustained shrieking going on in that song. They're peeking out.
Yeah, was that something out of Pink Floyd?
The reverb on those drums just about could have been.
That's Lately with Karen Hay on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland fine today, cloudy periods tomorrow. Auckland to Wellington, including the central high country. Mostly cloudy with patchy drizzle, mainly about the ranges. Afternoon fine breaks. Coromandel and Bay of Plenty, fine spells. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine with high cloud today. Bulla, drizzle developing this afternoon, turning to rain tomorrow, then gradually clearing. Westland and Fiordland, rain in Fiordland gradually spreading to Westland today with possible heavy falls, easing to isolated showers south of the glaciers by evening and gradually clearing everywhere tomorrow. Otago and Southland, scattered rain in the west, clearing this afternoon and becoming fine everywhere, and the Chatham Islands cloudy periods. It's 8 minutes past 6 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten. I'm losing my voice.
You are?
Yeah.
You sound terrible.
Yeah,
I'd
like to think that...
What were you doing out there? Were you yelling and screaming?
Yeah, yelling and screaming. I'd like to think that at the low points I sound kind of Bond-esque.
Sexy.
Thanks, KB. But at the high points I sound like one of the younger Osmond family members. Right. An Auckland councillor is recommending homeowners affected by the council's resource consent botch-up join up to a class action lawsuit. Last night we brought you the story of Gary Pont, an 82-year-old Greyland resident whose property developer neighbour was granted resource consent to build a 2-storey backyard extension. Gary believes that extension is going to block his son and decrease the value of his home, completely alter his quality of life, and that resource consent is one of 430 that are potentially unlawful after Auckland Council misinterpreted its own complicated, inconsistent unitary plan rules over the course of a year. But despite the mistake being entirely the council's, the councillors told people like Gary it's up to them to seek a judicial review in the High Court. And Auckland councillor for the Waitemata ward, Mike Lee, told our excellent reporter Zach Fleming that is unfair.
There seems to be a culture, a policy, almost an ideology in the council that favours not the community, not the neighbours, not the residents who have been paying rates forever, but the newcomer, the developer, the speculator, the new Jimmy on the block. They seem to be favoured against the interests of the community, of the neighbours, of the neighbouring property owners. And this is just another case, and it's part of a legally flawed set of decisions that this council has been making.
So what does need to happen here? Because we have two very distinct people affected. There are the consent holders who have been potentially issued with wrongful consents through no fault of their own. And then you have their neighbours, again, no fault of their own, who are potentially suffering because these wrongful, unlawful consents potentially have been issued. And then you have the council saying that if you've got any issues with it, go to the High Court yourself. Is that good enough?
No, it's not good enough. So who's at fault? Is it the developer at fault in this stage?
No.
He didn't consult, but he didn't have to. He was told he didn't have to. Is it the neighbour, the affected property owners? No, certainly not their fault. So whose fault is it? It's the council's fault. The Environment Court said so. Therefore, the council should order this work to stop. If the council has to pay compensation for their flawed decision, so be it. That should be covered in the council's insurance policy, but work must stop.
And work isn't stopping.
No, it's accelerating.
Yeah, you have this developer here, for example, who has been recommended by the council to stop work, but it's completely up to him, and so he's going to keep building.
The council should issue an abatement notice and order that work be stopped. Now, that means that the developer will have a grievance against the council, and that the council will have to own up to that and sort that out. But in the meantime, there is a legal responsibility and a moral responsibility to stop the work.
As the local councillor here, what can you or what are you going to be trying to do for these affected people?
Well, I'll just have to take it up, but and I'll try, but really the council, and I urge the council, issue an abatement notice, stop work. It's not fair.
That's Auckland councillor for the Waitemata ward, Mike Lee, talking to Zach Fleming. Gary's property developer neighbour, Alistair Raw, declined to be interviewed. Auckland Council also declined to be interviewed. Its GM of Resource Consents, Ian Smallburn, said in a statement that the council's priority is the consent holders, as it believes they are the people primarily affected. Mr Smallburn said the council will try to facilitate mediation, but acknowledged there is no requirement for consent holders to undertake mediation with their affected neighbours. This really is a fascinating issue, and obviously Checkpoint will keep looking at it. Let's head north from Auckland to Northland, where the outspoken Principals President Pat Newman is challenging new restraint guidelines that say teachers can't use physical force to make a child do as it's told. Mr Newman says children are getting away with trashing classrooms, swearing and spitting at teachers, and in some cases refusing to get out of their parents' car in the morning. And teachers, he says, are powerless to act. Here's an example of just what Mr Newman says they're up against. A Year 4 student who destroyed class property, including pouring teachers' drinks out on other children's workbooks. But because the teacher can't do anything about it, they end up evacuating the rest of the class from the room. Pat Newman spoke to our Northland reporter, Lois Williams, this afternoon.
It used to be able to be applied that if a child is throwing stuff around or throwing a tantrum, that you could pick them up because it was sort of that grey area. The guidelines have come out firmly and said you can't.
When did they come out?
Earlier this year or late last year, from memory.
And that was based on what? A legal opinion?
I would say so. What had happened was that were teachers in the country getting into trouble about restraining children, and it was usually restraining them after the danger or after the tantrum was over. So the ministry, trying to help, and I mean that, set up guidelines. Where it went wrong is I suspect it was written by people who are lawyers who have never been in a classroom and actually probably need to have some common sense about situations put into play. I don't think the law ever was meant to. I don't think the intent of the law was ever to say you let a child destroy a classroom and remove all the children out of it while they destroy it.
The law says, does it not, that you can use reasonable force to protect yourself or in defence of others?
Yes.
And some of these children are throwing things like scissors, right?
Yes, you can get away with lifting them out for that. But then it comes down to the grey area. When is the danger past? If you're in the middle of... these are questions that people are asking. If you're starting to remove a child and you're taking the scissors off them, are you then able to use physical restraint to move them out of the classroom? Or do you leave them without the scissors? You know what I mean?
Just take the scissors away?
Yeah. And if you think about it, under the Act and under the regulations, you would be able to take the scissors off the child. But the moment you've taken the scissors off the child, then they're no longer a danger, so therefore you've got to let them carry on.
Well, meanwhile, the rest of the class waits outside looking at this exhibition that's going on inside the classroom.
Yeah, and seeing all their work destroyed.
Have you approached the ministry about this and said this is nuts, we've got to get this changed?
Well, there is a meeting in Wellington tomorrow where there are sector group leaders and the ministry to review the guidelines. That was at the request of the Minister of Children. We talked to the Minister of Children about the problems this was causing about 2 months ago.
So this meeting is the outcome of that complaint, do you think?
I would expect it is. But my concern is that the bureaucrats will rule and they'll come back and say, no, we have to stick to the letter of the law. And it's the letter of the law that's causing us problems.
In the old days, you'd have just taken the kid and taken him outside and he'd have got 6 of the best from the headmaster, yes?
I've had intimate experience of that.
What, as the giver or taker?
As a taker.
Do you sometimes wish you could still do that?
I can tell you at times you often think that's all that's needed. It's not for all, though, and I'm being quite honest. A lot of these kids we're dealing with, it's trauma, and that's never going to help.
That's Pat Newman talking to Lois Williams, our Northland reporter. The Ministry of Education says in a statement that children should only be physically restrained as a last resort. Katrina Casey, the Deputy Secretary of Sector Enablement and Support, says in August last year a legal framework was introduced so school staff could be clear about when and how they could use physical restraint. She says the Ministry is now reconvening the Physical Restraint Advisory Group to refresh the guidelines and make them clearer and easier to use, including working with the group to discuss actual scenarios that schools are facing. I just want to say the name of that group again, the Physical Restraint Advisory Group. Excellent. The clock is ticking as the Silver Ferns prepare to face Commonwealth Games gold medalist England in Game 1 of the Quad Series. That's England did win the gold, didn't they? In Game 1 of the Quad Series on Saturday, newly crowned head coach Nolene Taurua was given the task of preparing the national netball side in only 5 days, but has already made headway today, announcing her captain, Laura Langman, and vice-captain, Katrina Grant. Netball reporter Ravinda Hunia sat down with Nolene Taurua earlier today and asked her how her first 4 days at the helm have gone.
Quietly pleasing. The intent of the players has been amazing.
They're very focused, they want to be better, they're open to learn. Communication has been amazing, the intensity in every training that we've done has been amazing, and I'm rapt with where we are at this stage. Obviously we haven't played a game as such, but you know, I think when I look at things we're doing as good as we can, so I'm rapt about where things are at.
What has been the biggest challenge for you so far?
I think, well, you know, we're very new. There's quite a few either players who have been out of the mix coming in. Some are newbies as such, and everybody brings their own story and have come in on a blank canvas. So I've been finding that exciting, but also the rush to get the pieces together and understand what do we actually need to move forward. We are learning as we are going, and it's not going to be until we take that first test that we'll see, okay, what reality is. You know, we just got to take one day at a time and try and get as much as we can in that day.
Now, you've worked a lot with Lisa Alexander and the Diamonds with her time at Sunshine Coast. What do you adopt from them into the Silver Ferns?
The voting system in regards to players voting, and also the high performance CEO and myself, voting for the captain and vice captain, voting for the structure that we wanted in the leadership structure within the team. So that's something that's been taken over or brought into the Silver Ferns environment. I think it's great. I think it gives the players the opportunity to voice who they actually want. The intensity of training is something that I've learnt over there, and the expectation around that. They always talk about high performance, but the ability to consistently perform from not only one training to the other, but also one game to another is the expectation. So that standard, I think, is something that's synonymous with Australian netball.
Has it been easier or harder than what you thought it would be coming into a side that, you know, has had this dark cloud over it for quite some time?
I'm absolutely loving it. When we went to our first training, I forgot about the Kiwi way, and what I say about that is that, that creativity, that flair, that heart and that passion, and you know, we play totally different to the Australians. We have different minds, and it was a beautiful reminder when we had our first training, and that's the exciting bit to it. So, you know, we've only got a short or limited time to get things rolling, and we've got to be realistic about where we are at. Performance is key, but also knowing we can't save the world. So we just got to put a product out there that we're actually proud about, you know, and that shows a lot of heart and passion, and you know, I think that'd be a great start.
Laura Langman, and not being able to play for the Silver Ferns, and now she's the captain of the Silver Ferns. Yeah. How does that make you feel watching her development over the years?
It's quite surprising, I think. You know, even though she's done 140 whatever tests it is, she's been out of the mix for the last 2 years, so it's a big shake-up for her. So not only is she trying to get her feet of being a player, the expectation of backing her name out there on court, but now she's been handed the captaincy, so I said we'll give her a doozy on top of that. So she's a type of person that will handle that, and it's amazing that her peers feel that she has that captaincy or those leadership skills, and she's not judged because she hasn't been here.
Have you thought about what that feeling is going to be like to be presenting yourself to ultimately the fans and the world as a Silver Ferns coach?
I remember my very first time as a player, and the very first time that you actually stand on the line, and it's very hard to describe the feelings that, or the emotion that happens, and I'm assuming it would be the same. We're as good as our last game, and that's our starting point, but also there's so much, I suppose, pride and honour that's on the line. You know, I'm going to be so excited to get, you know, it's been a long time coming, but so excited by the opportunity that's presented, and you know, as a starting point to see, okay, what is reality for us as a team. I think the most exciting thing as well is that we're on Saturday be playing up against England, who is the gold medalist for the Commonwealth Games, and you know, what way to start our campaign leading into the Worlds with the best team possible. So you know, let's get out there and let's see how it goes, and it's what it's all about.
Noel Todu are talking to Ravinda Hunia. The text came in at 5:37. They must have been really prescient, or it must have been off the back of a headline. But great news, Ree, the Silver Ferns coach now. The players need to front up. She can't do it on her own. I live in hope. Certainly she was sounding pretty optimistic, and persuasively so, Noeline. Taurua. Lots of people feel that she should have had the opportunity to coach the Silver Ferns long before now. Good luck to them. It's 6:22. The abuse scandal rocking the Catholic Church has moved to Germany, where the church there has expressed shame over decades of child sex abuse carried out by its priests, as revealed in a leaked report. Commissioned by the church, the report outlines over 3,500 children were assaulted by nearly 1,700 priests since the end of the Second World War. Only a third of the abusers have been prosecuted. The BBC's Caroline Rugby with this report.
Just last month, Pope Francis condemned what he described as atrocities of child sex abuse and clerical cover-ups in a letter to Roman Catholics around the world. Now, a new study has revealed the potential scale of historic abuse by priests in Germany. It suggests that between 1946 and 2014, more than 3,500 children were assaulted. Most of the victims boys, more than half under the age of 14. It found some 1,620 clergymen carried out various degrees of abuse, but only 38% of those accused were prosecuted. The leaked report was released by the German magazine Der Spiegel. Commissioned by the church itself, it was due to be published later this month. Researchers sifted through thousands of documents, but worryingly, its authors say the true extent of the abuse could be even greater than what they found.
It's scary. Above all, it is terrifying that it took us so long to finally be able to identify the numbers.
Responding to the findings, a spokesperson for the German Bishops' Conference said the extent of the abuse was depressing and shameful, adding the study shed light on what he called the dark side of our church, so it could do everything to prevent such errors from being repeated. This report is the latest in a long series of revelations that have uncovered decades of sex abuse by Roman Catholic priests around the world. It comes as a meeting is due to take place at the Vatican between Pope Francis and leaders of the Catholic Church in the US. They will be discussing a summer of scandals in America, most notably allegations against 300 priests in the state of Pennsylvania.
The report from Caroline Rugby with the BBC. Lots of feedback coming in tonight. Back to M. bovis and Nate and non-compliance, and some farmers who've put in compensation claims when in fact they had prematurely culled their stock. It's a fascinating story, this one, but a text from earlier in the programme says any farmer who is not NATE compliant should receive zero taxpayer compensation. It's a really interesting issue because 300 warning notices issued last month alone. Still a lot of farmers not dealing with NATE as comprehensively as people who designed the system hoped they would. The Quake outcasts in Christchurch is an interesting precedent, isn't it? Can you exclude people from a settlement that the government is enforcing? The High Court in Christchurch, was the appeal court, suggested you can't. Money for the All Blacks. Lots of discussion about this in the context, of course, that Checkpoint's done a lot of coverage of pay settlements for nurses, for teachers, and the coverage we've done about people not being able to afford or get access to immunotherapies and new cancer treatments. Basically, we haven't heard from a single person tonight who thinks the government should fund the All Blacks. This text seems to sum things up. Money for the All Blacks, no, F''N way. I guess that means flipping, no flipping way. What about paying our teachers, feeding our children, supporting our struggling people? Love your show, John. Thank you, Claire. In Auckland, John, Aurora's dangerous power pole. Surely they aren't going to complete the review. This is in Dunedin, where Timothy Brown has been doing good work, and then start working on replacing dangerous poles. It'd be crazy not to do both in parallel, i.e. fix dangerous network as they find them while doing the review. Yes, that does seem rather logical, doesn't it? Thank you for your feedback tonight. Really appreciate hearing from you. Let's go to Apple. I've tried to go to Apple many times over the years to discuss their tax paying or lack of in New Zealand. They never call me back. However, they've introduced its largest ever iPhone and a new line of watches that can detect heart problems. The move is a bid to get users to upgrade to more expensive devices in the face of stagnant global demand for smartphones. Chris Dignam has more.
I'm excited to show you what is by far the most advanced iPhone we have ever created.
It's also the most expensive. Apple on Wednesday unveiled the iPhone XS and its largest iPhone ever, the XS Max, at its annual product event in Cupertino, California, with the latter coming in at $1,100.
Just $100 more, starting at $1,099.
Apple also introduced the iPhone XR, which could stand for more reasonably priced to reach more frugal consumers.
That's less expensive than the iPhone 8 Plus.
CEO Tim Cook also aiming for Apple to become even more ingrained with our everyday lives.
iOS has changed the way we live.
Emphasizing customers' health in Wednesday's showcase, which began with the Series 4 Apple Watch.
Apple Watch has become an indispensable part of their daily lives by helping them stay connected, to be more active, and to live a healthier day.
The watch includes a built-in electrocardiogram to detect atrial fibrillation, a feature Apple was able to get certified by the FDA.
This is a de novo clearance, which means it's the first of its kind.
The focus on health, a hint Apple could be targeting older consumers, even unveiling a feature that looked like an improvement on Life Alert or the Clapper.
If the watch senses you are mobile for 1 minute, it will start the call automatically.
The more expensive device is a way to boost revenue as global demand for smartphones levels off. The strategy has helped Apple to become the first publicly traded U.S. company to hit a market value of more than $1 trillion earlier this year.
That report from Reuters, I believe. The reporter sounding dispassionate, very matter of fact in his coverage of Apple. Lots of feedback coming in. Really busy night tonight. Thank you so much. Just before we go, this from Gordon on Christchurch. So the Christchurch City Council is subsidising Christchurch hospitality and accommodation businesses to the tune of $220 million, leaving only $80 million for everything else we need in Christchurch. Ratepayers are going to miss out again while businesses get another handout. So who are the bludgers here? Asks Gordon. And John, re-abused by Catholic priests in Germany. It's not shocking, it's not surprising, it's precisely what I expect from the Catholic Church, says Alan in a fairly pointed text. That's it for tonight. Let's have a bit of James Milne, aka Lawrence Arabia, and The Sting to play us out. Thank you for being with us. We really appreciate the privilege of your company on Checkpoint. On behalf of our fantastic, hard-working and wonderful team, that's the program for tonight. But we will be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. An economist says the dairy giant Fonterra's first loss reflects an alarming pattern of financial underdelivery. Northland principals say teachers are confused by new guidelines and feel powerless in the face of appalling behaviour by disturbed children. It's emerged that native birds left on the steps of Parliament during an anti-1080 protest are likely to have been bludgeoned to death. Winston Peters now admits he was mistaken when he said all his MPs had signed up to a good behaviour contract. In fact, none have signed. And the Dunedin power lines company Aurora Energy won't explain how more than 5,000 power poles on its network went from requiring replacement for safety reasons to being serviceable. Our next news and weather is at 7.
This Saturday morning, Dame Louise Casey. After her report into integration in Britain, she became a pin-up for